Okay, welcome to In the Kitchen with Cabbage. Today we're going to be fermenting, or starting to prepare to ferment, our first food, which is cabbage, and we're going to make some sauerkraut. Okay, so the ingredients, the recipe is posted to Canvas. You just follow along with that, it'll walk you through the steps, but also you can follow along with the video as well. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure we have everything clean. So clean cutting board, clean bowl, all our utensils are clean. Okay, my hands are washed, that sort of stuff. Okay, all this has to be clean because we don't want to introduce harmful bacteria to our fermenting process. Okay, the first step after you have all your supplies and everything cleaned up is you need to take your cabbage and you need to slice it. Now, before you slice it, the outside edges might have a few bad spots. So the outer leaves are okay to peel off, and you can discard them off to the side somewhere where you're not going to use them. Once you get the outer 2, maybe 3 leaves off, you should have a pretty clean cabbage. I do have one little bad spot here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice off that bad spot with my knife and get rid of that. But now I've got a nice clean cabbage. Okay, now cabbage is a very tightly bound ball of leaves. So what you want to do after that is you need to core the cabbage. Okay, you want to get rid of the large stem in the center because that's not good eating and it's tough and it's not very good. So you're going to take your knife, or in my case a cleaver, and you're going to slice your cabbage in half. This is a tough cabbage. There. And we want to get rid of this core right here. So the easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is to take a knife, come in at an angle, down one side of the core, an angle on the other side, and you got the core out. Okay, I'll do that to the other one. Main part of the core out. Oh, still left a little bit in there. Cut that part off. There we go. Alright. Now, you can see it's kind of hard to cut through, so once you have your half, you're going to cut it again in half. That'll make a quarter. And then you're going to cut it in half again to make an eighth. Now you're going to take this wedge and you're going to start slicing it into strips. Okay, so you're just going to start slicing thin strips, regular size, so they're not too, not one strip's way bigger than the other. The other one's not going to be too thin. Pretty even strips. It doesn't have to be perfect. Take that strip and we'll put it in our bowl for breaking apart. Now make it a little bit easier to deal with later. And I'm going to continue doing that with the remaining wedges. Alright, and that's the last of it. Okay. Get all our cabbage into a bowl. And it needs to be a large bowl because now what we need to do is we need to combine our next ingredient with the cabbage, and that is salt. And our recipe calls for 1 head of cabbage and 1.5 tablespoons of kosher salt. You can use any salt that you like. I'm using kosher. 1.5 tablespoons is 1 tablespoon plus 1 and a 1/2 teaspoon, just so you know. And what we're going to do is we're going to sprinkle this over the cabbage, and we're going to start mixing it by hand. And you're going to want to mix this for 3 or 4 minutes. At first it won't seem like anything's happening, but what's going to happen here is the salt is going to cause osmosis to occur. That's going to draw water out of the cabbage cells, and it's going to create a juice in the bowl. Okay? We mix the salt up, and you'll feel it. It feels gritty on the cabbage. And I'm actually kind of squeezing it and speed up the process. I will break or crush some of the cabbage leaves and allow that salt to penetrate more into the leaves. So I'm going to keep mixing for about 3 or 4 minutes until this is all combined, and then we're going to let it sit. Okay? Okay, now I've pretty well mixed up this cabbage, but it may need a little bit of extra persuading. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to let that salt sit and work for a while. Like I said, 10 minutes or more. But one way you can speed it up is take a little bit of plastic wrap and bring out the heavy artillery. In this case, a nice hammer. So I'm going to use my plastic wrap up my hammer, because obviously that's not clean. And then I'm going to start to pound the cabbage. Not making a mess. Your parents will kill you. They might use the hammer in a different way. I'm going to kind of smash the cabbage a bit into the bowl. I'll give that a little stir. Use a spoon. Pull some of the cabbage from the bottom back to the top. This is all about creating that juice from the salt and the cabbage. We want that water coming out of the cells. This is the same method I use with a big batch when I use a 5-gallon bucket for fermenting, only I use a bigger hammer. Mashed our cabbage, and it's been sitting for a good 15-20 minutes now. It went a little longer. I wanted to get the salt to mix in with the cabbage. I also had to go ask the expert, my wife, if she wanted to add in the caraway seeds, which I said I don't care for it, but she likes it, so do what the wifey likes. So I'm going to mix in my caraway seeds into my cabbage. At this point, I'm going to give it a little toss, just like a salad. Get the caraway seeds mixed in, and then my next step is going to be to put the cabbage, salt, and caraway seeds into my fermenting jar. In this case, it is a 1-gallon size ball jar, and that's where the fermenting is going to take place. So I'm just going to take it, and I made a funnel out of my cutting board. I'm going to drop it in gently. Okay. I'm just going to do that until my jar is full or until I'm out of cabbage. Now you want to make sure that you're pressing down your cabbage into your jar tightly. So I'm just using my spoon to kind of smash it down into the bottom as tight as it'll go before I finish filling in the rest of the jar. Okay, then I'll continue filling. I'm just going to leave the funnel off for now with the cabbage that I have left, to make sure there's not a lot of extra space. in my jar. And if you have any liquid in the bottom of your bowl, you want to make sure that goes into the jar as well. So any liquid that comes out of your cabbage, you want that to go into the jar. And I got a little bit of cabbage on the cutting board. I'll pick that up and put it in as well. I'm going to pack this down as tight as I can get it into the jar. I don't want a lot of extra room in here. You can use your hand if you don't want to use a spoon, or if your hand's small enough to get in the jar. You want to pack it, pack it, pack it. Let you come get a close-up on the side of the jar. Pack it in tightly. And if a spoon's not quite big enough, you can get a larger object like a soup ladle, and that'll give you a bigger utensil to press with. Just be careful, don't bend your soup ladle. Now if you look, you can see as I squeeze, liquid is coming up around the cabbage, and that's what we want. We want our cabbage to get submerged under all that juice. That's where the fermentation is going to take place. Work my spoon on the edge some more. Keep packing it down. Try to scrape down any cabbage or seeds that might be stuck to the side of the jar. Okay. Now we're not completely submerged yet, and the salt hasn't finished the job of pulling the water out through osmosis yet. But our next step is we need to weigh this down. We need to put a weight on it so it keeps pressing down the cabbage, and as it ferments, it's going to condense and tighten up even more, and the liquid level is going to rise. And as long as that cabbage stays below the surface of the liquid, we will be in good shape for our fermentation. So I'm going to give this one last press. I think we're going to be in really good shape here. Bent my spatula, or my ladle just a little bit. Okay. So I have another jar filled with rocks and marbles and stuff. The jar, of course, is clean on the outside. We don't want to introduce bad bacteria, and it fits just inside the mouth of my fermenting jar. And I'm going to press down with my weight jar, and that's going to continue pushing down on my cabbage, and you can see the liquid's coming up. Okay, now I think we're going to be in good shape here. I do see a couple of cabbage leaves I want to push down before I go any further. It's not that the cabbage leaves on the side of the jar will cause any problems. It's just that if there's a chance for mold or something to grow, it'll be on anything that's not submerged in the fermenting juice. Now, what I want to do lastly is I want to cover this jar to prevent bugs or dust or other things getting in there. So I'm going to use a cloth. This is just a clean microfiber towel that I had laying around. I'm going to push down with that, and I'm going to use a large rubber band around the top. Now, if this was a 5-gallon bucket, I just simply laid the cloth or a towel over the top of the bucket, and I just make sure that it doesn't get knocked off or it's not sagging down, touching anything inside. So I don't worry about a rubber band on that. Okay, now this should sit for 3 to 10 days, and we'll have completely fermented sauerkraut. I will probably check it in an hour or two, and if my liquid's not quite high enough, I will push that cabbage down some more and then reset my weight and redo the towel. But big thing is I want that liquid to come up above my cabbage so it's all submerged. The last thing I'm going to do is take this and I'm going to put it in my basement where it'll be sitting on a shelf for the next 3 to 10 days, and we'll monitor the progress. Okay, now we're in the basement. The basement's nice and cool. It's like around 65 degrees-ish in the basement, and that's going to be a perfect fermenting temperature. We do not want it to go above 75 degrees. So find someplace in your house that's going to be consistently around 70 degrees, and it'll ferment very nicely. Over the next few hours, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep checking it. I'm going to keep pressing the cabbage down with the jar just so it makes sure that it gets submerged. As the salt continues to work, the leaves are going to continue to grow more and more wilted and limp, and that's going to compress even further, which is exactly what I want. If in 24 hours there's not enough liquid covering that cabbage, I can add a little bit of water and salt mixture. What I would do is I would mix in 1 teaspoon of salt for every cup of water and add just enough to submerge that cabbage under about a half an inch to 1 inch of water solution. So I can add some salt water in 24 hours if there's not enough generated by the cabbage. If there is, I'm not going to touch it. I'll let the cabbage juice do its work. For now, we're just going to let it sit, and I'll check it about every hour for the next 4 or 5 hours, just pressing it down as we go, and then we'll take a look at it during our Skype meetings and see how it's progressing. So if you're doing this at home, you're going to be monitoring and recording your observations. Follow these steps and procedures, and you should have good success with your sauerkraut.